Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of MedTech POV, the podcast brought to you by AdvaMed, the world's largest trade association for medical technology companies. I'm your host, Scott Whitaker, President and CEO of AdvaMed. Today, we're pleased to have with us Mike Minogue, former Chairman, President, and CEO of Abiomed, and also the former Chairman of the AdvaMed Board of Directors. Over the course of his long career in MedTech, from his start at GE Healthcare to Abiomed, Mike has led diverse teams that have been laser focused on innovation and saving lives. As a proud Army veteran, Mike has also dedicated his life to giving back to those who have served our nation through the MedTechVets program, a great resource for transitioning service members to a career in our industry. I'm proud to call Mike a friend, and I look forward to talking about all these topics as well as his values as a leader, the experiences he has had in leading global teams, and where he sees our industry going in the future. Mike, it's great to have you on the podcast today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
I've been looking forward to this for a while, since you stepped down as board chair, and looking forward to this conversation today. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
I always like to kick off the episodes by giving our listener a little bit of a sense of who the person is behind the big title of CEO and what you've accomplished. So maybe you could take us back to your early days, Mike. Where'd you grow up, and sort of what led you to where you are today?
So, Scott, I've really enjoyed working with you as the AdvaMed chair. It's great to see you again as well. Yeah. And just like as I learned about your background and what brought you strength, I think all of us bring to the table our upbringing. So I was born in Georgia. I grew up in New Jersey. I was the youngest of 4 kids. My mom and dad were from the Bronx, but my dad moved around when he was in the Air Force as a pilot. And then we ended up in Georgia when he got out, and then we essentially grew up in New Jersey. So it was a great upbringing. I had 2 older sisters, 1 older brother. We had a really fun family. We did a lot of sports. We weren't rich, but we always had fun. We didn't know any better. And the joke every year was, does my mom get a new dining room table, or do we go skiing this year? And we always chose to go skiing. So my dad was good carpenter. He made a big table with a big piece of wood. We put a tablecloth on it, and that table stayed there until I went off to college.
Yeah. Well, a lot like me, Mike. I was the youngest of 3, all boys in our family, but being the youngest kid in a family makes you a lot tougher than the older ones. That's what I used to always tell my brother. So I don't know if that was true for you as well, but.
Well, I had a really good older brother. He's 4 years older. I would say he was nicer to me than I was to him. And I had 2 wonderful older sisters, and probably the best thing about them is they taught me how to dance. And my wife always says that she married me because I could dance.
Oh, okay. Well, that's certainly not the case for me. So that's not why Michelle married me, yeah. But that's good to know. So your family, you came from a service-based family, right? A family that was kind of defined by service in so many ways. Tell us about that and talk about your family members, how they've served the country over your life.
Yeah, so I think service is a state of mind, whether it's the military or police enforcement or healthcare. My dad was, as I said, an Air Force pilot. My mom's dad was a police officer. My mom's brother was an Air Force pilot and decorated from Vietnam. So I was raised with this sense of purpose. My mother, when I was 10, I begged her as the youngest Irish Catholic mama's boy, Mom, what do you want me to be when I grow up? What will make you proud? And she would, of course, not tell me. And she kept telling me that God had blessed me and I can do whatever I want to do, but serve a good purpose, follow your dreams. And then finally, when I wore her down at age 10, she said, okay, if I have to tell you, I would say to be a priest. Mm. And then I asked her, what's your second choice? Because I knew I wanted to have a family, and I do. Two of my close friends are both priests. They do amazing work. One's in Whitaker, New Jersey. One's in Paterson, New Jersey. And we do a lot of stuff with faith-based education as part of our current journey. And we've been doing that as a family for many years. But I think what I loved about healthcare was, as I got out of the military and as we want other veterans getting out, we want MedTech to be the home for these veterans. It's because in MedTech, you serve a purpose greater than yourself. You're helping patients 24/7 all over the world. And I think that that's really a component. But my father laid into that kind of this entrepreneurial work ethic as on top of service, which kind of gave a great combination to me. So as a kid, I cut the lawns for most of our block. I delivered the newspapers. And during the Carter gas shortage, there was a gas station down the street from our house. And if you remember, there was no Starbucks, and people parked their cars for miles. So at 6 a.m., I sold coffee and donuts at a young age and made a lot of money. And I was upset when the gas shortage ended because I had a pretty good checking account as a young kid.
Yeah, that's great. With all your years of family service in the military, I guess, Mike, that's kind of what led you to go to the military academy. Is that right? Or was there something else that drove you there?
Well, as I said, my uncle was, my mom's brother was an Air Force TAC at the Air Force Academy. My dad was in the Air Force as a pilot. I was definitely raised in a way that the first component of what you would do would be to serve your country. And I didn't think of any other better place in the world than West Point. Right. I didn't apply to the other academies. They're great too. And AdvaMed, we recruited a lot of them as well. Right. But I just felt that West Point was the fit for me. It was around pure leadership. And as a student athlete, I saw kind of being an infantry platoon leader as the ideal position that I wanted to achieve and grow into as I became, a more mature adult.
Talk about your time at the military academy a little bit, Mike, and then your years serving in the military afterwards. How that shaped your thinking as you went into the medtech industry and then became a CEO. How did that impact how you led once you were in the private sector?
A lot of times the civilian world thinks the military has one style, and it doesn't. It has multiple styles, the style has to be authentic. Right. But what proves leadership is you have positive results with integrity achieved by inspired followers who become the best version of themselves. And without that, then you're not a leader, you're a friend or you're a manager. And so as a kind of platoon leader and as I was at West Point, it really is about balancing the tension of achieving the result with really making your team know that you care about them, you want them to be the best version of themselves, both professionally and personally. And then the other element of it is kind of, from my style, is lead from the front. So as an infantry platoon leader, I carried everything my team did. I got the last piece of food. If COTS came in, I got the last one. I slept less than they did. And in the civilian world, when I went there, I tried to keep that same mindset, lead from the front, learn, be engaged, and learn from the people around you. And so I think that at West Point, I really had a tremendous opportunity to be thrown into leadership roles, to succeed and fail, and constantly develop my style. Right. And I think one of the things that I do currently, and I did at AdvaMed, is I'm always asking people to document their style. An average person will spend more time on their golf swing or their tennis swing than they will on their leadership philosophy for their entire life. And so It's why you read books, it's why you document it, and you look for ways that you can enhance it, improve it, and make sure that your teams not only achieve great results, but feel fulfilled and have fun. And that's the element that I think people miss, is that these elite military teams, the bonds that you form, the teams, but also the ability to joke and have fun is really a component of great success.
Yeah. You mentioned you played sports growing up and then played football, I think, at Army as well, right? And let me ask you about that. We talked about the military side of what you learned, but how have sports helped shape you as a person and then as a leader as well?
So like you're a great basketball player and you love the sport, and there's lessons, because in sports you're constantly failing. Right. And so you have to get used to, it could be temporary failing, right? You miss a shot or the ball is stolen from you. For me, I played a lot of sports, and the two biggest ones for me were baseball and football. What I liked about both those sports is there's an element of team, but there's an element of individual contribution. So in baseball, when you're up at the plate, there's no one there to help you. And in the skilled positions where you're a running back or a receiver or even a defensive back, there's a moment where you're in the play and you can make a big impact. And when you're not in the play, you got to be supporting your teammates. And so sports to me is really a great way to fail, to learn, to get knocked down. Something that not everyone knows is I was a late grower. So I was really small my freshman year. There's an embarrassing picture my friends love to bring up and send out where it looks like there's a little kid with the football team my freshman year.
Yeah.
And it put a little chip on my shoulder that I had to run harder, hit harder, have better technique. And then I grew, which was helpful as years went on. And it gave me an advantage because the things that I had to do when I was so much smaller, things became easier as I got bigger later in high school. And I did play at West Point my first 2 years, but I was a bench warmer, and I went there and they put me in the receiver role. And if you've ever watched Army play with the wishbone, it meant that I was a fast blocker. So I got very good at coming in and hitting a linebacker from the side, running full speed, and making up for the person having a lot more weight than I did.
Well, I'm not going to probe how many catches you had then and what your stats look like at Army. We'll just celebrate the fact that you played in college, right? That's good enough, more than most people do. So quite an accomplishment. The other thing you and I have talked about a lot from a leadership standpoint is the role that faith has played in your life, Mike. You mentioned that your mom wanted you to be a priest, and that wasn't the best path for you. But the faith element has carried you throughout the course of your life as well. Talk about how that's impacted you personally, and then maybe a little bit about how you lead from the faith side as well.
Faith is a great thing to have, and there's different levels and different religions. And so the first component is knowing there's a higher being, there's a greater good. And I think that's the element of service. So if you bring that into any job, who doesn't want a leader that believes in the greater good and
right.
wants to help people? And so right. For me, my faith is very important. It lets me know that for me to be successful, I have to help people. I have to help people personally and professionally. I have to have a certain level of humility. And obviously, if you're a believer in Jesus, he's one of the greatest leaders as far as leading from the front, working with his people, making sacrifices. And the other thing that faith brings leaders is there's always hope. You never think anything is impossible. Right. And you always believe that if you're doing the right thing, you can have success. And at AdvaMed, we had something we called patients first. And that's the truest form of giving back to people, helping people, because you're always going to do what's in the best interest of the patient. And you want every patient to be treated as if it's a family member or friend. And that's truly, you're able to do that in MedTech. And at AdvaMed, our patients sometimes are family members or friends. And right. We just always go that path. And that gives us kind of the higher ground and integrity to just have a culture that is greater than any individual and greater than any product. And we always see the patient outcome as the ultimate success. And we don't look at the metrics other than those things.
Yeah. Mike, let's transition to your professional career a little bit now. You started, I think, at GE Healthcare, didn't you, as a salesman? And you kind of worked your way through the ranks there for 11 or 12 years to where you are today. Talk about your time at GE. Some amazing CEOs that were there at the time. Jack Welch, Jeff Immelt, I think, two of them. Talk about your time at GE and then what you learned from those two leaders that has shaped your thinking as a leader today.
So, Scott, I went to something called the Technical Sales Program. It was at GE Medical Systems at the time, and it had around 10 people per year in the whole company. Most of them were engineers out of college. I was an engineer after serving in the military. And it was about a 17-month program, which was incredible. Some of it was in headquarters. Some of it was in the field with, the sales and the field engineers. And I tried to duplicate that at Abiomed as well because it was such an influential component. And at the time, Jack Welch was larger than life. I think one of the things about him is how he talked about delayering and speed, right? And the simplicity of a business. I really took that with me, and I lived that at GE. The way I got into GE, as my dad was a very good coach, we identified several companies. I wrote a letter to Jack Welch and got a call back, and that's how I ended up in GE Medical's programs. I also worked for Jeff Immelt, and Jeff Immelt really was an amazing, charismatic leader. He kind of really showed me the importance of culture and building that team. He made every leader feel like they had a personal relationship with him. But as you mentioned, there's probably 40 plus CEOs in MedTech. And one of the benefits of being at GE and then also being at AdvaMed is you get to be around awesome leaders. So
Right.
two of my favorites are Pete Arduini, who was at GE with me. Now he's running GE Healthcare. And Mike Mahoney, who's now running Boston Scientific. They were great guys. Mike makes everything fun. He's got a great sense of humor, but he's uber competitive and driven. Peter is he builds teams, he builds loyalties. He's a great listener. And I also had, at GE in the heyday, probably two of the best people I worked with were two salespeople that were mentors for me. So one was Greg Barber. That was my first mentor in Colorado. The other one was a guy, they called him the legend, Chuck Stayart. And Chuck gave me my first lesson in negotiating. We had a deal where an MRI was sold in my territory. I did all the work, but they were a corporate account in Chuck's region in Northern Cal. And that was brand new, and he was a legend, and he was a big guy, ex-Marine, super charming. And he said, let's write down on a piece of paper how much we think each person should get. We'll write it down, we'll hand it to each other, and then we'll open it. So I wrote it down, he wrote down his, then we exchanged it, it was closed, the meeting started, and we had to sit there during the meeting looking at each other. And then finally he looked over at me and nodded for me to open, that he would open his first. So he did. And I offered, not to offend him, 20%. I was going to give him 20% of the commission of all my work. And he nodded, he smiled, it was appropriate. Then he gave me the nod for me to open his. I opened his note, I looked down and I read it, and it said, never negotiate with yourself. And it was a great lesson. And Chuck and Greg really showed me that the front line, the infantry of companies, or the field team, the salespeople, the clinicals, they're there. They see the great things. They see the problems. And it really taught me how that group is so important. That's the way I kind of operate as a CEO. I was always trying to be in the field, in scrubs. And I had an amazing teacher with my father who was a chief commercial officer. That's why he embedded a little bit of entrepreneurial and business. But our vacations a lot of times were business meetings, and I was always with the kids of customers. And so that's kind of how we grew up.
Yeah, great story. I want to back up to Jack Welch for a minute and ask you a little bit about him, because he was a strong CEO. It strikes me as someone who had strong opinions and a certain way to lead. You would know better than me, Mike, but I wonder from time to time if a leader like that can be as successful in today's corporate environment as he was able to be back in that time. Would that leadership style translate, you think, to today?
It would, because, I think, again, there's different styles. They just have to be authentic. And you have to be a different leader, whether you're a small company or a big company, right? So that people have to lead differently depending on if they can be at a micro or a macro level, right? So these large organizations, that requires a certain level. And one of the books we studied at Abiomed, and we were fortunate to have Jim Collins as a consultant, was Good to Great, Built to Last, Good by Choice. I mean, all these different books that we studied and we documented. And when I first started, I probably wasn't a level 5 leader. I was 37. The company was going out of business, and I didn't have any patience. I had to make probably 50% of the decisions. I had to go for the speed. And I had learned that from the GE days of speed, simplicity, self-confidence. But as I grew, I started to understand there were certain decisions and certain milestones that I had to build consensus. I had to have people engaged. But even as a leader, if you can still make 20 to 30% of those decisions with you and your immediate team, you don't have to build consensus on everything because you know a lot, and you're in the decision-making process, and that allows you to be more focused on the ones where you do need consensus, because your immediate team, when you're smaller, can make big decisions and can do it quickly. And I think that's kind of the same mindset that Jack had at GE, which was speed, simplicity, self-confidence. What I was always impressed with Jack is he could get through and understand the problem right away. And that's what the simplicity was. Don't spend 8 hours on slide decks and financials. Figure out where is the area, if that's the opportunity, and go to it, delever it, and put all your energy there, because intensity is very important. Focus is important, especially when you're a small company. And if you don't have that one thing that you're best in the world at, Jim Collins calls it the hedgehog, you won't make it.
Right.
But as time goes and different needs are there, I got to watch Mike Musalem with Edwards. When he was 5 billion market cap, we had a $500 million market cap. And, he was a great leader for Edwards, and he kind of revolutionized the treatment of heart failure for aortic valves. And you watch his company also had to evolve. When you're a little company to a big company, that's what changes it. There's a book I studied called Blueprint to $1 Billion by David Thompson, and it's about the things you have to do to get to $1 billion. But once you get to $1 billion, now you have to adjust. And every year we try to figure out how did we have to adapt and execute. And the main reason is because a lot of times little companies are great at adapting, but they don't have that bureaucracy, that org chart. They just do it through a network. And big companies have all org charts and matrix, but they don't have that informal network. And so what Abiomed we tried to do is have this we called it the operating heartbeat, where we could adapt and execute and lead and manage. And we could keep the speed, but put in the processes and put in the org chart to make sure both things work together.
Right. Mike, I want to back up to when you decided to pursue the Abiomed job. I believe it was your first CEO job, correct? And
correct.
That's a big leap for anyone. And tell me a little bit about how you thought about and what that process looked like. In the context of a lot of people who are listening to this will look at you and say, that's a process I want to follow. That's a goal that I have. How do I make that decision, and how do I lead coming from a large company into a small company and grow it?
I had a great time at GE Medical. So the first thing is I wasn't leaving GE Medical, right? I always tell people, are you leaving the job or you're going to something that's your dream job? So number one, I wasn't leaving GE. I had a great career. I loved the people there. I was at a young age and I was at a pretty senior level. I had good relationships with the senior leaders of the company, but I wanted and I felt that my entrepreneurial skills, and I had been successful at GE because they kept moving me from business to business inside of GE Healthcare. Right. And I could make changes and get results by taking most of the same people, a little bit of strategy, a little bit of team building, and come out with good results. And I love that. I loved my time there. But at a certain point, I didn't want to keep being moved, and I wanted to control my own destiny. And I had found out about Abiomed, which was a company that made the total artificial heart. I had gone for a few visits. It probably was smaller than I could have. I had looked at bigger companies, but I wasn't going to get the CEO role of a public company that was in trouble and raising money. And to some extent, I felt that was my playbook. I had gotten very good at turning things around. And I did a Pew Matrix, as you would expect, and all the analytics. And I had one of the Pew Matrix was my gut. And I essentially felt that it was the path for my wife and I, and going through it, we felt this was our path. I loved the cardiology space because I felt like that was the next frontier. GE, Siemens, and Philips had essentially bought most of that space. And I was very passionate because it's directly taking care of patients. I mean, these are life-saving technologies. These are very sick patients, young and old. And what I loved about Abiomed is just this sense of they were, in science fiction, replacing somebody's heart. And in my first year, I realized in watching people have AbioCore, the artificial heart going in them, it was an amazing race car. It was one of the most complicated, amazing medical devices ever made. But it was like the race car you watch on TV that was never going to be a commercial product at your dealer. So that's when I started understanding that, boy, there's a little more trouble here than I thought. When I took the job, I had just turned 37 years old. And there's a benefit of being young because you don't necessarily, expect certain things. And even after you do all your homework, but as long as it was the passion, the field, and what I wanted to do, I was never disappointed because I saw what a great role that Abiomed could have in helping patients that truly were in dire need. And while it was tough and there was tough years and a lot of personal sacrifices, I loved every minute, and it's amazing to see what it's become.
How long were you there, Mike, before you realized that the challenge was going to be different or maybe greater than you thought?
So in the first year, I did watch a few Abiocors. I watched 2 at Jewish Hospital with Doctors Layman Gray and Rob Dowling, and they were incredible surgeons and dedicated. But I started to see that the recovery for these patients that they had to be almost near death. They had terrible kidneys and hearts in order to get it. And the product was so invasive that we had missed the window. And while that was going on, I started seeing patients that were younger, 40s or even 19-year-olds with myocarditis, which people know what that is now because of COVID. Back then, most people didn't know what it was. It's a virus that attacks your heart. So college kids get it. And we started having people getting myocarditis that were in college, and they'd get our surgical pump. And when they would go in to take out the pump to put an implantable in, or maybe even a potential transplant, their hearts had recovered. So that was what I realized. That's the superpower. That's the space. And in good strategy, that's what we do best in the world. There was a lot of other companies much bigger than us building implantable LVADs or doing transplant components. So we started to look at that, and we really focused on recovery. And while that was going on, I was looking for technologies that could help recovery earlier with the patient in the cath lab. So we didn't have to wait for them to hit the cath lab with myocarditis or a heart attack to eventually end up at a surgery center with heart transplant. So at the time, we were really calling on 100 transplant centers, even though there's 1,200 hospitals with cath labs and surgery suites. So we started building a intra-aortic balloon pump, which I could put on with our VADs. That was the standard of care. And then we quickly found Impella and worked on Impella to bring it into the company. So that acquisition was done within my first 12 months. And that really revolutionized. It took the concept of heart recovery, which we were doing and were FDA approved for our surgical devices, and allowed us to shift it earlier in the path of the patient in the cath lab, because that's where most of these patients go right away. And the rest was just the execution with amazing engineers and scientists. The inventor was Dr. Torsten Cease, and he and I are brothers, and we were together for 19 years. He's still now running all the research under the Johnson & Johnson umbrella. And then other people that were there, like Bill Bolt, or people that I recruited, like Mike Howley or Andrew Greenfield or Dave Weber. And Andrew today was my chief commercial officer. He's now running Abiomed as the president.
Mike, talk about the growth. You said how big was Abiomed when you took over as CEO, and then when you sold it, how large were you?
We were around 22 million in revenue, losing money. We had 50 million in cash. So I calculated when I got there, we had 2 years before we were going to run out. And our market cap was around 170 million. So last year we ended around 1.3 billion in revenue. Our market cap, we were sold for around 17 billion with upside. We had over 1 billion in cash and no debt, and probably the strongest IP portfolio in all of MedTech, with nearly 2,000 patents and over 2,000 pending.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. Was there a time over that 19 or 20 years, Mike, where you were worried that you weren't going to grow at the pace you thought, that you
Every
did
year.
something? Yeah,
Yeah. I think that sometimes people think, even now, the ones that are starting, it's like, if you don't have problems, you're not looking at the hard facts. Every business has problems. What you really learn is that there's going to be crisis. This is not checkers, it's chess. So your competition, the world, the economy, all these things are impacting you. And instead of like having a plan and thinking that you have to just stay on it, prepare the plan with the ability to adapt and execute. Because as things change, if you build in the audible structure in your business, the ability to, they call it, and Jim Collins calls it, shoot bullets. And what it means is see where you have these wins, pilot things, and then when you realize that the bullets are landing and it's helpful, that's when you can build a cannonball and then roll out a program. And so with Impella, we kept shooting bullets for the applications where they were best. We kept adapting the products. And what's amazing is we treated over 250,000 patients. So this is the most successful VAD in the history of heart pumps. It's the most studied heart pump in the history of the FDA. And the impact to patients, whether it's high-risk PCI, so someone who needs support to have a stent placed, or patients having massive heart attacks going into shock, or patients that are in the surgical suite in shock and need support, we were able to change the concept of the only option is to get a transplant, which is limited to 2,000 per year, and you have to take autoimmune suppression, to trying to recover the heart first for all acute events. And if the patients do live, it's nearly about 90% plus recover their native function and can go home with their own heart, which is the best for the patient, it's the most cost effective, and clearly the best quality of life. And so those are the things we were able to do, but it was difficult because of turf battles and because of the law of diffusion of innovation. But it's the journey and it's the adjusting to it is what makes you successful, because as you fail and adapt, your business gets stronger and stronger. You should be worried if you don't have any failure, because it means that you haven't hit the mode yet of failure. And what really happened to us were two events that changed the world for us. First was the Impella acquisition. The second was we got a 510K clearance followed by PMA approval. And once we got the PMA approval, I believe Abiomed was the fastest growing, most profitable medtech company for a 5-year run. And we improved the outcomes for patients statistically on a field that hasn't seen improvement in survival in cardiogenic shock in 20-something years. And so that's what's so exciting, but it's going to continue to evolve and get better because the innovation is even accelerating even faster now.
Yeah, I want to back up to your comments about crisis, because as you said, you're going to have a crisis or multiple crises if you're leading a company like this. We were working together through the COVID crisis, which was such a unique time. But as you reflect back on your 19-year career at Abiomed, what were the crisis management strategies that you had in place that other CEOs or aspiring CEOs could learn from? And how did you manage your way through each of those?
So there's a couple tools we have that we developed. So the first was a tool that we created called EICO, so EICO. And that's where you take the crisis and you do a 4-block on a piece of paper, you brainstorm, and you write down all the things that are terrible that you have to endure, the worst fears you have. You put them down on paper and you write them out. And then as you're doing that, you look at the things that you can influence, and then you also look at the things you control. So COVID, we had to endure that patients weren't getting treated or there was limitations in the ICU. We could influence that by being able to talk to the customers, train them. And then what we controlled was our headcount, our attitude, our budgets, our investment in online training. But in all of that, you find an opportunity. And that's what pops up as you do this.
Right.
And then our opportunity was that we had a technology where we could monitor patients in the cloud. We called it Impella Connect.
Yep.
But hospitals prior to COVID didn't like to give you access to Wi-Fi. And we have been shipping all of our consoles with this Wi-Fi component on the box already. And we've just been eating the cost of goods sold. So hundreds were already out there. And when COVID hit and they had limitations and we were still 24/7 bedside, the hospitals allowed us to have access to their Wi-Fi, and that it was HIPAA compliant. It goes into the cloud, and the cloud goes to a phone or an iPad, not back to the system. But then we can monitor these patients real time. And we went from 40 sites in the world with the pilot for Impella Connect to over 2,000 within a short period of time. Wow. And nearly every patient in the U.S., every time a pump went on, the rep got a ping, the doctor could have access to it, and we got it at headquarters. I could see nearly every patient, every alarm on my phone as if I was standing in the ICU. And that component was very helpful. The last component of just managing the crisis is speed. So we had a just do it criteria where a person could give themselves approval for anything. And we'd always say you can pilot it, but you have to answer the 4 questions. Is it legal, ethical, cyber secure? Is it good for my patient and customer? Am I willing to be held accountable? Doesn't mean you're going to be fired. It means that you're going to stand up and say, I did this. Here's what I learned. And last was, does it meet my leader's intent? It's got to be along the lines of the tactical plan and the goals. And if you could answer those, you could do it. And we really tried to build this pilot mentality where when failure happened, we did an after action review. What was the plan? What really happened? What did we learn? Who else needs to know? Put that on one slide and share that with everyone, because as you would learn those things, you get better and faster, and you can pilot 10 things. And then once you pilot the 10 things, you know what the final plan is going to be. Then you can go build a consensus and run the playbook. And in crisis for us, if we're better than everyone else at it, and it applies to your customers, it applies to your suppliers, we can do even better when we anticipate and we expect to have crisis.
Yeah, that's great. A lot of lessons there and some great learnings as well. Mike, I'm reflecting back on your time now as AdvaMed chair. And when you became chair, one of the things that was very important for you was to make sure that we had that same patient focus here at AdvaMed as you had at Abiomed as well. And as I listened to your answers today, Mike, I think almost every one of them, you told or connected it back to a patient. So that's still something that's important to you. Talk about why that's so important for industry leaders to understand that sort of patient connection first.
So Scott, you have a great job, and you have the total patient mindset. So we couldn't have a better leader for AdvaMed than you, because you see it as a dad, you see it as a family member. You see the things that these patients are experiencing. And at Abiomed, we had this patients first commitment. And the reason it was so important is because people want purpose. They don't want to shave off 2 percentage points of the cost of goods. Those are business things. But people, especially today, want purpose. And to be able to save a patient's life, and you build a culture around that, that's gonna create something special. And so at Abiomed, we started every board meeting with the patient. Our board members understood how important. We had a lot of physicians on our board as well. And there was nothing better than having patients back to headquarters, whether it was Danvers, Mass, or Aachen, Germany, which we did every quarter in person. And they got to meet the people that made their pumps. And so for the manufacturing people to know that what they do matters, and to meet these patients is something that's very special. We're not making a toaster oven. And so quality, every job in the building is important. Everyone knows they have a part to play. And I think at AdvaMed, one of the things that I was always in awe of is how much the industry does. And everyone, I think, has had an experience once or twice of something bad happening to a family member or friend. And I'm not different. And I know that when I'm in and I've had these events, I sit in the room or in the ICU and I can look around and I see the products that are at MedTech at AdvaMed. And I see the companies. Yesterday I was looking at an ultrasound machine, a Stryker, just a normal checkup for something else. And I see the leaders, Kevin Lobo at Stryker, and I see Pete Arduini, and I see these folks that what they're doing, their leadership style is so authentic, because at the end of the day, if they do their job really well, they're going to impact and save the lives or improve the lives of patients all over the world. And what I really wanted to do at AdvaMed was just make sure we connected the dots. Because we're all so busy. And unless you're bedside or you're personally struggling with something, you may not know what incredible stuff is going around all of us in the industry itself, because we all don't have that view that you have, looking out at all the different companies. So it's a very special group.
Yeah, it is. And it was impactful. It was so encouraging to listen to different company leaders tell the stories and do the work to tell the stories. And then to watch CEOs sitting around that table, you could see the emotion on their faces about children or a spouse or a grandparent whose life was saved because of something we did. And it really brought it all home, right? It brought it all home in a way that not many industries can do. And it was amazing and really, really heartfelt too.
I had 2 experiences. One was with my nephew and the medical device field. The equipment, the technology helped these physicians save his life. And personally for me, my son years ago had an event that the medical device industry and the technology with the physicians and nurses helped save his life. So, it's just amazing to know that my friends that I work with when I go to the group meetings had a part in helping to save my son's life. And that's a pretty amazing group of people.
Yeah, and we never can lose focus of that, because it is the thing that makes us particularly unique and impactful as an industry that really no one else brings. So,
and one of the things for me as the leader of Abiomed is because I did work hard and I traveled a lot, when patients came back, I wanted my family to know as many patients and their stories as possible. So over the course of time, I've made tremendous friendships with all these families. And when I had my own event, it was the family members of these patients that were sending me texts, giving me advice. And then just last month, I got a great video from Hillary Stefan, who's one of our patients, a young woman, sent me a video of her doing pull-ups.
oh, wow.
She nearly died. She got transferred from one hospital to the next on our Impella pump, sent to a transplant center where they put our surgery device in her. And rather than having to transplant her, she's a young mom with 3 kids. She is full recovery, and she's back with her husband and kids, and she's working out all the time. And those are the cards and notes and pictures that I get even now, which is it's very special to me.
That's awesome. Let's transition to the MedTechVets program, Mike. It's something you started. It's been a passion of yours and adopted by many in our industry as well to help support veterans who are coming back from military service to find jobs in our industry particularly. Talk about why you started that and the value of that to a company.
So it's a great point you made. The veterans transitioning out, they don't want a job. They want a purpose. And they really are ideal for, MedTech should be the home for these folks because they're smart. They've been through the discipline of the military. And they really do want to serve a purpose and extend it. And so when I was at a 2012 AdvaMed event and President Bush was speaking and I had a table of wounded warriors, they were telling me stories about how when they would go in to get interviewed and the HR person, trying not to be, offensive, but would say to them, well, the problem is you don't have any experience. And the people they'd be interviewing against have been working in the civilian world for 4 years, 5 years. And some were had lost limbs, and they'd say, I've been trying to learn to walk again for the last 12 months, but I was in the military. And what we wanted to do was create a program that could value their time in the military and value their purpose and bring them in. So we started MedTechVets.org, and I'd ask everyone if they're prior military or they want to help and mentor, they can go to the website and join up as a mentor. And we've gotten hundreds of jobs, probably over thousands of jobs now. And then we try to really target MedTech. Some will go outside into other ones, but because we really want to capture that spirit. And over the years, what we evolved from is all the MedTech companies doing these on-site programs to something we call the Academy, which is a 12-week program. They're on calls twice a week. They learn how to interview, write resumes, and the big benefit is where they're from, they can get a mentor from the area. They're logging in from all over the world. And remember, some of them, if they're from New England and they're now in Texas, they haven't been in New England in maybe 5 to 15 years. Right. So they want to get back to wherever their home is, and we can capture that, bring in the companies. And we've been able to get a lot of jobs for the officers, and we've been able to get a lot of jobs for the enlisted or people going back to school. And it's been a great program. And it really got 10x better when Derek Herrera took over as chairperson. And then Patrice Sutherland now is with Integra. She's doing a wonderful job. It's a great group of folks that really want to help give this opportunity. But I think it's a win-win because it's a diverse, smart population. And in 10 years, 20 years, their sense of integrity and purpose is also going to continue to keep that strong culture in MedTech around patients.
Yeah, that's great. And it's an honor at AdvaMed to support that program. And I would encourage, as you did, Mike, anyone who's listening to this to learn more about it and engage and support those who have served us and served our country over the years. I want to transition now, Mike, to your life after CEO of Abiomed, if I can. Talk about what you're doing now and what your current passions are, and maybe a little bit about what the future looks like for you.
Sure. So, it should, bittersweet. I joke now that whoever came up with the term must have sold their company. Yeah. That's the only way you can describe how it feels. And, for the first month, it feels like you're just on a vacation. Right. And then it sets in, and there is an element of study and mourning. Like you for me, I do miss the people. This was for 19 years. These were my family, my best friends, my life outside of my family. So I miss them, but I'm a believer in when you step aside, you let the next group run the show and you kind of step back. So Andrew Greenfield's a phenomenal leader. He's part of the success of Abiomed. He's been there 17 years, and we had a succession plan for him, and he's running with it now, doing great along with his team. So I've kind of stepped back, and I did some calls with people who've been through what I've been through. One was with Jim Collins. He told me his new study and what he's working on now is what happens to level 5 leaders when they retire. And he gave me some great advice that you can't take the purpose you had in your life, in your company, and spread it like butter by being on 8 boards. So I'm on one board right now for it's Insulet, great company, great purpose, and I love it, and I'm going to stay on it. But what I'm really trying to do now is give back. So give back to my family, where I've missed a lot of birthdays. I haven't done my share of pickups. I've missed a lot of sporting events. So I pick up. I don't miss events. I have 5 kids, 18 to 10, so it's a blessing to have this extra time. My wife and I have a foundation, so we do a lot of stuff for faith-based education. We've been going around doing that. I've been going and giving talks at high schools and colleges and business schools. And I'm trying to do a little bit more for MedTechVets and maybe document some of the things on the history of Abiomed and lessons learned. So I'm having fun. I'm making sure that I enjoy this time. And it's kind of a different phase, a different purpose. But I'm enjoying this next phase. And a couple good books that I read. So Halftime's one, Strength to Strength is another great book. Hinge Moments is another great book on transitioning, because you have to appreciate when you come from a Super Bowl champion team that you love and you practice with every day, you can't go join another team and expect it to be the same. And knowing that and studying that and understanding what it meant to you and transitioning in a healthy way is very important for me. So what I've just learned is I like purpose. I want to give back. But it starts with my family, my wife, and my kids.
Yes, I've seen you, Mike, on LinkedIn at a number of different colleges and high schools where you've given talks. And I don't know this because I haven't asked you before, but it seems like that is something you're really enjoying. And I'm curious what you see in future leaders that you've been talking to at the college or even the high school level.
Yeah, I do enjoy it. And I also enjoy reading and then trying to help certain people really develop their leadership philosophy. So there's a tool, a technique. You can do self-study, but you need to write for that. So when I go out, I come away optimistic.
Yeah.
Because what MedTech has is purpose. And I think that's what makes our space so special. Most of the other jobs that are out there don't have purpose.
Right.
So the purpose for them, meaning like the service, unless you're doing a volunteer organization or something specific, is that's what that next generation wants, more so than even us. If you look at their resumes, and I've been helping certain people with getting jobs or getting out of the military one-on-one, is they've done incredible stuff to give back already. And what we now need to do is give them the leadership skills that they can go into these different industries and different groups and make a bigger impact. And it doesn't have to be in a field where you save people's lives. It could be something else. But if you do it with honor and integrity and you build up people and you help them professionally grow, that's also a great benefit. And that's what I've taken away from getting out there.
Let's reflect a little bit back on your career, Mike, in MedTech, but in doing so, look forward as well. I'm curious what you see as the trends in healthcare sort of broadly and maybe more specifically in MedTech that either concern you or areas that make you really excited about what healthcare looks like going forward.
Sure. So, if I think about what's going to happen in the future, the future is two things. So there's the future of the next 24 months, which I think a lot of people focus on. But I had some good mentors that talked to me about, think about the future in 5 to 10 years. Because in 5 to 10 years, you have to be doing things now in order to get there in our space. So the first thing is innovation is going to accelerate. The next couple of years is just going to get more and more. And the way you should define innovation in our space is, number one, it improves outcomes for patients. So I think the outcomes for patients across the board are going to get better. Number two is it improves ease of use for the users, for the physicians, for the nurses. That's also going to get better. And that's going to accelerate and make the lives in those jobs more productive. And then the last is you have to minimize the impact of biology, so these adverse events.
Right.
That's what's very exciting. And AI, while there is concern in the medical device field, it's going to be phenomenal. It's going to revolutionize imaging, treatment, active tracking. I mean, it's just, and what you can do in the cloud 24/7 is something that hasn't been done in the last 100 years. So that's positive. I worry about the hospitals, their financial stability, and the way the system is set up. As a result of that, you're seeing more things go to outpatient, right, or more things go to home-based treatment. And some of that's really good, right, because that allows more expertise. But if you do too much of that and it's driven primarily purely on reimbursement, you're not going to get the skill set and really to be able to use all that high-end innovation that is in the hospital. And I think that's where partnering with the FDA, CMS, and the insurance companies, that you can show them, back to how I started, this is better outcomes, it's easier to do, and it minimizes the effects of biology. That's what always drives that cost-effective equation. So in the work that you're doing and the work that Jeff Shuren's been doing and what's happening in CMS, everyone has to just understand that this is not a new widget. Right. New widgets don't win. I think that's the biggest fallacy that's out there with sometimes even some of the political groups, that they don't truly understand until they have something happen to them, that the technology that what we're producing now, the results are so much better. And in almost every case, the technology is less expensive than it was, and the treatment is less expensive than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah. That's a great answer and really intriguing. We could spend a whole separate podcast just talking about that, Mike. But I want to bounce back up to an earlier conversation about leadership and advice you would give CEOs, either those who are aspiring to be CEOs or maybe those who are CEOs, because the next 10 or 15 years is going to be particularly interesting and could be particularly challenging too, right? If you're trying to run a company. Are there one or two things that you would say to CEOs now that they need to be aware of, or pieces of advice you would give them that you feel like is critical that they hear now that you've moved through this stage of your career?
Sure. I think the best lesson for me, and this is like as you're going to become a CEO, whether it's the first time, is, I have a saying that says, dream big, execute bigger.
Yeah.
And so you don't have the luxury when you become a CEO to just be the vision guy or just the ops guy, right? Sometimes people say, oh, I'm an ops guy or I'm the vision guy, right? And that's, if you're in charge and you're the CEO, you're both.
Right.
And so you have to be able to have different gears. You have to be able to study and read and document and work with your teams, because if you have a great vision, which is important, right? It inspires people. It gives people the path, where they're going forward. It tells them the why out there around the patient. But if you can't execute it, then it doesn't mean anything. And sometimes bigger companies can lose the vision and become more about a management company. And so good leaders, they can do both. And second component of that is I call it micro leadership, macro management.
Right.
So everyone hears the term micromanagement, they think it's negative. Well, if I micromanage you, it's because you're not doing something right. And maybe you need that because I need, as a better boss, I need to teach you, these are the metrics, this is how I would manage it. But that's very different than leadership.
Right.
So micro leadership means that I'm going to be obsessed. I'm going to be into the details of your leadership style. I'm going to give you direct feedback. I'm going to ask you to document your leadership philosophy. How do you communicate? How do you act in a crisis and not a crisis? What are your principles? Why do you want to be a leader?
Right.
And so those are the things that, as you pull that team into you and you paint that vision, you need to pull the people in, develop them as leaders and as followers, so that they can execute bigger. And if you do both, you're going to fail, but you'll always get better at every failure. And along the way, you're going to build an amazing team. You're going to have a lot of fun, and you're going to do some great stuff.
That's great advice. We've spent a lot of time here today, Mike, and this has been awesome. I like to close it out with a little bit of a lightning round, just to get a sense of the things you've learned and motivate you over the years. So, quick answer if you have it. What's the favorite or best book you've ever read?
Well, the obvious is, as a faith-based person, if I excluded the Bible, for me, probably Blueprint to a Billion was the template for me. David Thompson. All the Collins books were great. And then from a market perspective, Law of Diffusion of Innovation, Jeffrey A. Moore, and Inside the Tornado. Those are my favorite groups of books, and those are actually some of the people I worked with and were very helpful to mentor me as well.
That's great. You spent a little time doing advocacy at AdvaMed over the years as well, so I won't limit this next question just to your time at AdvaMed. But as you think about over the course of our history, U.S. presidents, is there one that ranks highest, your favorite among them all?
Favorite is George Washington. I named my fifth child after him. He was a soldier. He was a leader. He sacrificed. He sweated. He got shot at. He was cold and wet. And it's what made him unique for the first time, a military leader. Unlike the British who were in the hotels, he was with his troops in the front lines. And I think he's the most influential leader in the history of the United States.
Yeah, great answer. If you could have dinner with one person alive today or from the past, who would it be and why?
Well, George Washington would be my first choice. If I did a second choice, and it would probably be Abraham Lincoln, because he had a really sad life. And usually someone who's depressed and has a terrible life doesn't necessarily become the most successful person of his time, which he was. And he made great sacrifices. So it'd be interesting to see how a person was able to do so much with so much sadness around him. If I picked a business person today, I'd have to say Elon Musk. He's just fascinating because he is impacting everything today. He impacts politics, communication, technology, innovation. Pretty amazing to see one person have an impact on the world the way he is.
Yeah, I sent you a text. I remember this maybe a year or so ago. I said, if there's anyone who's having more fun right now than Elon Musk, I don't know who it is, right? I mean, that guy is in everything and seems to enjoy everything he's in, whether you agree or disagree with him, right? He seems to be really having a lot of fun leading these companies, and it is fascinating to watch. Let me close with this one. Is there a most important success that you've had or a most important failure that you've had that has really helped define you over the course of your career?
I think the most important success has been the blessing that I've had to have such an amazing group of people to work with. I've had great teams, people I love, people that I respect, people I learn from. And at Abiomed, it was just amazing to have these brilliant people to work with them. I miss them. We used to start our weekly Monday calls with a slide that said, this is the fiscal week the Lord hath made. Let us rejoice and be glad. And it was because I miss them. I love those people. And in the industry itself, I went to my first meeting the other day and I saw a lot of the customers, which are friends and business people. But I have a tremendous amount of friends over the years from the Emerging Growth Group to I'm really proud to watch, Ashley at J&J, what she's doing now with Abiomed and AdvaMed. And I'm very proud of Doug Godshall at Shockwave. He and I worked a lot together back when he was at Heartware. And it's just a great group of people. So the greatest success for me is just to be around amazing people on my team and amazing peers in the industry.
Yeah. Is there
failure? I've got lots of them, and you want a short answer, so it'll be a long list. A long list. So I think the net for me failure in my personal stuff is I was impatient. Working on patience, and where it's a strength, it can be a strength, especially if you're a smaller company and those that are at smaller companies were worried about payroll and making next quarter. I mean, that's the good of not having patience. The bad is that you really need the consensus and you need people to be able to work things through. And sometimes you can give up a little speed by making sure that you just keep your mouth quiet and listen more. And I formally had to learn how to do that rather than try to say, okay, I think I know the answer. We don't have time to spend this much. We're just going to go this way. And that's something that I probably hurt and made a few bad decisions along the way because I didn't have the patience to let some of the processes play out.
Yeah. This has been great, Mike, and we appreciate you taking time to join us today. We also appreciate your service to AdvaMed and the industry over the past 20 plus years, I guess. And you've had such a tremendous impact on us as an organization, me as a leader at AdvaMed, but on the industry as well. So on behalf of everyone, thank you for your years of service and all that you've accomplished. It's been an amazing run. So thank you.
Well, Scott, God bless you for all you do for all the patients in the industry. And it's been a pleasure working with you. And I hope to continue to see a lot more of you in the future.
Sounds good.
Take care.
For those of you listening, thanks for tuning in. For more episodes, visit advamed.org/podcast or subscribe to MedTech POV on your favorite streaming platform. Until next time, this is Scott Whitaker. Have a great day.